My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Tear down this wall.
For history tells us that while these truths may be self-evident, they've never been self-executing.
And yes, together, we will make America great again.
At Politico and the author of our global translations work. And we're now turning to US global leadership in 2020 and beyond. Our two guests need very little introduction. First and foremost, former Secretary of State John Kerry from the United States, and of course, Anders Fogh Rasmussen from the Alliance and the former Prime Minister of Denmark and the former head of NATO. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ryan. Good to be with you.
I'll turn to you first, Secretary Kerry. Global public opinion isn't looking good for the United States in lots of respects now. Essentially, every country surveyed thinks China had a better response to the pandemic. But what we've also seen is that rights can be abused in countries that don't have checks and balances much more easily in this pandemic situation. So I want to know, does the pandemic make you an optimist or a pessimist for US global leadership?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm an optimist because I believe that Americans are really waking up and taking stock of the position that the current administration has put us in. I mean, there are reasons to be concerned about the pandemic carrying into 2021. I think that's clear. And that's going to be very difficult. It's going to present the next president, with major economic challenges as well as global strategic challenges. But I am optimistic about that. I believe that we're going to have a new president. I think we will see record levels of turnout in this election. People are seized by a number of issues, obviously enormously moved by what happened with George Floyd's murder and the aggregate of all of the civil rights components of life today, including environmental justice. And people see a linkage between COVID-19 and the unwillingness to listen to science, to listen to facts, to listen to experts, and climate crisis, where they're unwilling to listen to facts, and we still have deniers in the United States. So the United States has succeeded in the last 3.5 years of literally alienating itself from our friends. It has made the world a more dangerous place without any question. The Iran nuclear agreement, climate change, walking away from the agreement, a fake trade war, which has raised prices for people and discombobulated the entire trade scheme. You can run down a long list. The President of the United States standing feet away from President Putin and disavowing his own intelligence community, saying, why should I have a reason not to believe President Putin? So we've seen things that none of us literally would ever have believed we could have seen or heard from any administration, Republican or Democrat alike. And I think the dam is breaking now. I see the latest polls show Vice President Biden well ahead. I don't take anything for granted. I've run for president. I know what happens in the last weeks, and they'll pull out every stop. But I am quite confident about America's future, providing we have a change in leadership. If we don't have a change in leadership, all bets are off on many, many different issues.
Well, now that you've raised the elections, I'll go straight to the heart of the matter. You were Secretary of State in 2016 when we saw Russia interfere in the election. Now that we're looking forward to the next race, what threats are you worried about most with the 2020 vote? And I'll get Anders to chip in afterwards as well.
Well, Ryan, I'm really concerned about two things, obviously. I remain concerned about the foreign threat. President Trump overtly, according to John Bolton's book, invited China to get involved in the race and help him win. I think that we know that Russia is engaged, not just here, but in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Facebook took down 6.1 billion fake accounts last year. And you can bet your boots that that's not the end of the problem in any way whatsoever. They're very sophisticated at finding new weaknesses or opening up new weaknesses, and undoubtedly there will be attacks there. So there is the foreign front that we have to be concerned about. I'm also concerned about something that affected my campaign in 2004. It affected Al Gore in 2000. And it has obviously affected other campaigns in our country in the last few years, including most recently in Georgia, where certain officials of a particular party purposefully make it difficult for the other party to vote, where they control those matters. And so we have precincts where there aren't enough machines, people wait in long lines. It's already going to be complicated because of COVID. So access to the ballot is supposed to be one of the greatest things of democracy. And here we are, having held ourselves up as the leader of the free world for a long time, and certainly of the Western world and democracies, and we're not meeting the standard that we ought to be meeting. So I'm deeply concerned about protecting the vote. And thirdly, we got to make sure that people actually do vote. So I think those are the key items that are being worked on now. A lot of people are focused on this. I'm very hopeful that we're going to have so many people voting, and frankly, that the vote will not be close, so that things are definitive and we have a clear mandate for the future for the United States.
And I don't know about you, but as an Australian, I find the voting access issues mind-boggling in the United States. For me, that's just alarm bells everywhere. I know that you see us drowning in misinformation and disinformation. So what's your top threat in 2020 that we need to have in our minds?
Well, first of all, we definitely need an American global leadership, and I hope to see that after the elections. I'm concerned about the foreign interference, but I think the US is much better prepared than 4 years ago. But we have seen that the Russian playbook has been adopted by China, by other autocratic regimes in the world. So I think we still have to put a close eye on those developments. And this is also a reason why we decided yesterday to continue the work of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity that I established, by the way, with Joe Biden a couple of years ago. The purpose of that commission is to monitor elections and to look into possible foreign interference with our elections. So we are better prepared, but I think we should still focus on it.
Great. Secretary Kerry, you've got your own experiences as a presidential candidate back in 2004, as you already mentioned, and you were very gracious and quick to concede when you did lose narrowly. So for me, that begs two questions. How do you think Americans, the citizens, and the political operatives will cope in 2020 if it's a delayed result, for example, because there's so much mail-in ballots, a close result or a contested result? And then the follow-up, do you think Trump will actually leave in the manner that we've become accustomed if he does lose this election?
Well, let me say, first of all, I wasn't all that quick to concede. I didn't concede until well into Wednesday afternoon because there were serious questions about what had happened in Ohio and in other places. And I finally did concede indeed, because I thought with America at war, we were only a year into the war in Iraq. The last thing we were going to be benefiting from was a contested election that took us to December, and then we'd have the same result that we had in the Gore thing. So it just didn't make sense. But my feelings about now are I'm going to do everything in my power, and everybody I know is going to work to make sure this is not a close election. And the way it is going right now, it will not be a close election. I can't speak to what will happen if it is. It depends on the circumstances of what were to make it so. But I believe that Americans want to move in a different direction. This has been chaos for 4 years. And as I said earlier, there are major issues, Ryan, and you know this, and Anders is so familiar with this. We're looking at cyber, where you can press a button and stop a nation's business completely and alter all kinds of services that are in that nation. We have, and nothing is being done to follow up on what we started in the Obama-Biden administration to work with China on setting the rules of the road for cyber. We have to do that. That is a negotiation just as important as a negotiation on nuclear weapons, as it was for Reykjavik, for Gorbachev and Reagan to take us in a new direction. We need leadership that's prepared to move in a new direction. We also have to face the nuclear issues coming back, not just India and Pakistan, but Russia and the US and others. And we're seeing the threat of increased arms race conceivably. It's stupid, it's dangerous. It's a vast expenditure of funds that we don't need to do. And then you have, of course, climate change. You've got the challenge of global unrest over the populist nationalism that is being exploited as a result of the downsides of globalization. I mean, there are many huge challenges, all of which, pandemic of health or any of these other issues, you have to have global engagement. The United States must be there. Today, as we're talking, it is no exaggeration to say that we do not have a leader of the free world. And the institutions we put together, Ryan, you know this, at the end of World War I, World War II. World War I, we said we don't want chemical weapons. We banned them. World War II, we talked about how to deal with torture, how to bring countries together. We created the UN. None of this was done just for the sake of doing it. It was done because we knew it was going to address problems and be a better way of making the world a place where we can operate and work together and get things done and have a better life. That's not happening today. We have people praising dictators and moving in the opposite direction. So I'm going to continue to believe this election will not be close. We'll have a mandate in America, and if it is close, we'll just have to deal with whatever the circumstances are at that time. Hopefully, we've laid enough groundwork with the legal barrier that we will be well prepared.
Picking up on that institutional point, we've got an audience question in from Anders Pedersen, who is a journalist with the news site Congressin. And he is asking about what you think the future of American democratic institutions is if Donald Trump is reelected. And I'd throw in there all of the international organizations that the administration seems intent on either withdrawing from or undercutting. For example, sanctions on the International Criminal Court, withdrawing from World Health Organization, and so on.
What was the beginning of the question?
How worried are you about the future of American political institutions? So I guess the two sides are—
I'm worried. I'm worried. Right now, our democracy is not working up to par. Very simple. Too much money in our system, far too little sensitivity to the plight of a whole bunch of people who are living far more unequal lives. The disparity of wealth distribution in our country has grown worse and worse by the year. So we have major challenges. And if people don't have adequate access to the ballot, I mean, that's the stuff on which revolutions are built. If you begin to deny people the capacity of your democracy to work, even the founding fathers wrote in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, we have a inherent right to challenge that. And I'm worried that increasingly people are disaffected. What encourages me is this incredible spontaneous reaction to the killing of George Floyd by those police officers has unleashed a torrent of awareness that people see this unfairness now, and it's, I think, becoming a voting issue. It wasn't a voting issue. It may now become one. So this is going to be a fascinating year. We have not had a year like this in the United States since 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated and Bobby Kennedy assassinated, and we had major challenges in our streets. I am more optimistic now that we're going to see a massive response and perhaps real change for the better. And that will strengthen America in the world. We'll have greater credibility in dealing with countries all around the world. And if we get a new president who the world respects and is ready to listen to and believe, I think you'll see a world of difference in other countries too.
One area where we might see some more common ground in the substance, if not in the style, is US-China policy. It strikes me that there is bipartisan support for a tougher stance towards China, and that ranges from the democratic issues in Hong Kong, the fundamental rights with the Uyghurs, trade policy is a matter of dispute. But I guess my question is it Trump's policy that's wrong, or mostly his execution of it when it comes to China?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, your policy is part of your execution. Everybody has agreed that China presents real challenges when it comes to what they're prepared to do in reciprocity and fairness in the economic exchange of nations. They operate by a different system. And that system, which can sometimes force companies to be forced to give up their technology in order to do business, or that don't get equal access to the marketplace, that's unfair. And every country in the world should care about that. Donald Trump is right to raise that issue, but that's all he's done. He raised it and then he walked away from it. And we now see in John Bolton's book, he didn't just walk away from it. He was ready to trade help for his reelection for buying more goods. And he said, if you buy more goods, then that's the end of the trade issue. No, it's not the end of the trade issue. And so the president's policy is not correct to the degree you can discern what it is. And I think that we have to also recognize we will not solve climate change without China being deeply involved. We got them to be involved in the Obama-Biden administration. I went there, I negotiated with President Xi. The Chinese came on board for the first time, and it was critical. We need to thank the Chinese for the work they've done. They have taken climate change quite seriously. They still have a problem with coal-fired power plants, but we're going to have to address that. None of that has been talked to by Donald Trump. He doesn't even believe in the climate issue. So he is making life far more tenuous, risky for people all over the world are affected by Donald Trump's attitude as the leader of the world's largest economy. It is critical that the United States lead on this. And so while he may have defined some of the problems with China, he has not executed thoughtfully at all. And in fact, we are far worse off today in the relationship with China than we were when he started.
The climate change issue, I know, is one that's really close to your heart, and it obviously can't be solved by countries going it alone or not contributing. I wonder, how can Americans who are frustrated with the administration on climate change maximize their impact on the issue? And does that include, for example, governors or other actors going and partnering or negotiating with China directly to get those links back, regardless of what the administration is doing?
Well, there's a simple answer. What can Americans do? Vote. 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 In 2016, when Trump was elected, the turnout of eligible Americans was 55.6%. The year I ran, I think, in George Bush was about 62.3 or 4%. And when Obama got elected 4 years later, it was 63.7%. You get the drift. Of young people who have the greatest stake in climate and the future, only 19% of people between ages 18 and 25 voted, Ryan. So, I mean, go figure. If people will come out and vote, we will change the direction of the world. And so I think that's the foremost thing that folks have got to do. But people need to understand, I've worked on this issue for 30 plus years, and I had the privilege of leading our negotiations in Paris and working on the whole road up to Paris. And I will say to you that even if we did everything we were able to achieve in Paris, and we're not, we would still see a warming of the planet to 3.7 degrees or more. We're currently on track to hit 4.1 or 4.5 degrees in this century, the end of the century. We're just not getting the job done. No nation. And China is about to bring 21 gigatons of coal-fired power online. India, the same. That's just Katie bar the door. That's the end of it if we let those things happen. So we have a monumental challenge ahead of all of us. And what's exciting about it is it's not a downside economically. If we make the right choices and do the right things at the right pace with the right level of cooperation, there are millions of jobs to be created, extraordinary benefits to flow to our countries in terms of health, less particulates in the air, less cancer, less emphysema, less asthma for children and so forth. And there's a huge benefit of additional security to all of our nations by building new energy security base on which we're not at risk of sending people to the Middle East to fight a war to defend our ability to run our factories and our homes and heat our homes. So I think there's a very exciting future if we'll grab that future. But we only have about 9 years left, according to the IPCC scientists, to make the decisions that will make the greatest difference for us in avoiding the worst consequences of climate crisis. So we got to get to work, and we got to get to work fast. That can only happen with a President Biden. It simply will not happen if President Trump were reelected.
A question for both of you now. I was interviewing Joshua Wong at the summit yesterday from the Hong Kong protest movement, and he was very frustrated that we're still in the zone of statements of concern about the situation in Hong Kong. And he was particularly critical of the EU for not doing more to stand up. But as two people who've been in those rooms crafting that diplomatic language, at what point do you flick the switch from the statements of concern and move into the trade embargoes, the sanctions, or other measures? He was clearly frustrated. And I want to know from two people who've had to make those judgment calls where you think it's time to step it up on Hong Kong.
Anders, go ahead. I've been speaking a lot.
No, I mean, you're the guest of honor, so it's natural that you have been the one who has spoken the most. I would say what we do need is, now I'm speaking for Europe, I think we need a more united European stance. I think we should listen to the Democrat activists in Hong Kong. I think we should speak up, stand firm, tell China that they are not fulfilling their international obligations by passing the security law. I also think we should step up our support for Taiwan. The Chinese adhere to the principle of one country, two systems. But within that principle, we can support Hong Kong and Taiwan much more. Let me conclude by saying I'm so grateful, John, that you took time to meet with us today. I fully agree with you that the COVID crisis has taught us that we need more, not less, international cooperation. So what we need is that the free world forms an alliance of democracies to stand up against the advancing autocracies, to set the international norms and standards for trade, the use of new technology, etc.
Well, Anders, thank you. I agree with you that we have, look, we should never not stand up for democracy. Democracy is a foremost principle in our being. It's our DNA. And no place knows better what happens when you are not vigilant than Europe. Europe has lived a tortured history because of fascism and tyranny and the communist challenge and so forth. So, but we have to do a better job, Anders. I think you know that. Here in America, our Congress in the last few years has been dysfunctional. We don't even pass a budget. There's almost no bipartisan legislation passing. That is not a function of the system. The rules were the same when I was there in 1980, and we worked across the aisle in bipartisanship. What has changed are the people and the leadership politics, where people are not standing up for the institution and for the system. I think that, and also, you know, in recent days, we just read, again, John Bolton's book lays out pretty clearly that President Trump did not stand up to President Xi with respect to the Uyghurs, and basically said, go ahead, you know, inter them all. We've got other things to talk about. So if you don't stand up that's when things run away. That's when, evil can take over. And I think it's vital for us to remember, as I was saying earlier, we created this liberal order, as we call it, of the West, not to be liberal, not to just have a structure there to talk about. We created it because it put in place institutions which would help us work more effectively, live more effectively, be safer. And we have been. NATO, which Anders headed up, NATO's one of the greatest alliances ever created in the world. And yet our president has actually been attacking it over these last few years. So I think the road is clear. I don't think we need to, keep repeating. The challenge is making the democracy work, which means voting, taking part in it. There's no automatic pilot in democracy. And there's nothing that despots in the world love better than to see the West wringing its hands and churning over where it wants to go. We're wasting so much political energy. It just is astounding to me. Things like Brexit and so forth. My God, Europe's been on hold for the last few years.
Well, this certainly wasn't a waste of our time. Secretary Kerry, Anders, thank you so much for the discussion. It's time to move on to the next session. I wish we could speak for much longer, but everyone has limits on Zoom, so it's time to move on. Thank you so much. Stay safe and stay well. And everyone else, take a short break before the next session. Stay tuned.